Chair, and just to welcome all the witnesses. And I think it's important to note that it's disappointing that Minister Donnelly didn't see fit to attend. And I think while no one can doubt Minister Rabbitte's commitment, given the scale of the issue involved and the failure of progressing disability services, the least families would expect is the presence of the Cabinet Minister. The evidence is overwhelming. Progressing disability services is currently a failure. It's failing children and it's failing families and it's breaching their rights and is not providing therapies when they are most needed and when they are most effective. We're all aware of individual cases that represent the severe lack of services. Down Syndrome Ireland, As I Am, Inclusion Ireland and all the others all have comprehensive reports showing the overall situation, from glaring regional variations to no therapies for over a year and a complete absence of communication. And I think this situation has gone way beyond the point of us sitting around saying it's a disaster and talking about what a disaster it is. It's a breach of people's fundamental human rights, and it is literally ruining people's lives. So every week at the Disability Matters Committee, we have families, advocates, representative groups coming in and explaining how awful their life is as a result of this. And it's gotten to the point where, as a member of that committee, I'm not comfortable with it anymore. We don't need more people to come in and tell us how awful it is, how challenging their day-to-day lives are. We don't need that anymore. We know that. What we need is action. The purpose of that committee is to oversee the implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And I think it is glaringly obvious at this point that the reason we have not ratified the optional protocol is simply because the amount of cases that would be taken against the state. Like many deputies have highlighted, it is a breach of people's rights. It is a breach of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And if that optional protocol was ratified, there would be a sea of cases taken against the state. That is the reality. For too long now, the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act not being implemented has been the excuse for not ratifying. That has been rushed through this week. Why? Because a case has been taken against the state. My questions are mainly for the department today. So first of all, at the Children's Committee in February, you confirmed that none of the Children's Disability Network teams in the entire country were fully staffed. So how many teams are fully staffed 3.5 months later? First question.
Sorry, representing deputy ourselves.
Sorry?
Sorry, you just said the department, I presumed. You were asking questions to the department.
Oh, sorry, for the HSE.
Yeah.
Okay. In relation to staffing, there obviously is a self-perpetuating issue here, as under-resourced teams leads to overstretched staff who feel they're not providing care they want to, and they feel they're being ethically compromised within their job, and they're limited with the work they can do with children. So obviously they migrate to other countries, they go into private practice just to be able to do the jobs they're supposed to be doing. So unless there is a considerable plan to rapidly help staff teams, this situation will get worse. It's not going to get better. Related to this is how student therapists are treated, many of whom receive no remuneration for their internship or placement work. So if we want to retain these professionals as graduates, they need to be respected from day one. So what plans are there in place to properly recognise student therapists? The absolute lack of communication and accountability is a major concern. Family forums were supposed to be an important pillar of the progressing disability services, but what is the state of the family forums? How many have been set up? Related to that is the issue that Deputy Ward raised around the HSE refusing management meetings with the Minister because it wasn't what you called operationally feasible. So just a really brief question on that is, what has changed now? Why is it one day it's not operationally feasible and the next day it was? Mr. Reid, I have a question concerning the National Access Policy, which was referenced by the Minister. I'm wondering if you could outline how primary care have engaged constructively with the National Access Policy, and how is that policy being tracked and monitored in terms of its effectiveness? Finally, Minister, in your opening statement, you referenced the need for a form of audit on how progressing disability services is being implemented around the country. I'm wondering if you can elaborate on what that would look like, how that would help, and the timescale involved. Like I said, we are beyond the point of talking about the disaster. You've mentioned that the buck stops with you. I think you've, in your opening statement, outlined some of the on-the-ground solutions. I want to know if those solutions are going to be implemented by the HSE, because the concerns people have around the kind of disparity in the approach, the feeling that the general public have now around the Minister being blocked, that needs to be addressed. So the on-the-ground solutions that the Minister has and the dedication that seems to be there from the Minister and the team, is that going to be implemented by the HSE?
In relation to the family forums, at the moment there are 5 in place. There are approximately 50 that work is actively going on at the moment towards their implementation, and the work on implementing the others is commencing, with the expectation that all family forums would be in place and active by the end of this year. And that's what we're working towards. By the end of the year at the latest.
Would you commit to meeting parents groups that have formed their own version of this in the interim then, because that's a very, very long time away?
There is work going on in terms of meeting with parents, and that's been kind of managed okay, and I know that colleagues and CHOs are meeting with families. I appreciate that that may not be a universal experience, but certainly we don't have an issue with meeting with family groups. I think the concern that we'd have, sorry, concern is the wrong word. The approach we want to try and take here is that the family forums are for the families of all children with disabilities. Some of the groups that we're meeting with are particularly focused, for example, on parents of children with autism, or
in some cases there's been no meetings with management. So can I get a commitment, for example, that in CHO4 there would be engagement from management with the parents there, because they've been trying to get a meeting over and over again?
Yes.
Thank you.
Maybe Yvonne might want to comment on the national access policy.
Sure, yeah, and thanks, Deputy. So one of the points that was raised by Deputy Sherlock earlier, and I was saying that actually one of the important constructs around meeting children's needs is actually the national access policy, which is the first point of contact that we want for families to have around the assessment, and that we would begin to understand the needs from the least complex to the most complex. So you'll know that that comes through the sort of primary care structures that we have, and the investment in the teams at primary care level. So there isn't, I wouldn't deny here that there's gaps in the teams, the same as we're having the conversations in relation to disability with the same types of challenges. But each CHO is implementing the access policy within the available resource to them, and we're very committed to that as a very significant construct and support infrastructure for meeting needs from the least complex to the most complex. Yeah.
So the specific question in relation to that was, so that makes sense as the policy goes out and each CHO then implements it, and there may not be a uniform implementation of that. So I'm wondering, has there been constructive engagement from all primary care in each CHO? Is it uniform? Does there need to be more, is there any oversight of that?
Yes,
is it being monitored and tracked, and how is it going? And based on the fact that I think we all know it's not going great, what is being done to identify those gaps and the different approaches in CHOs to make sure that there's a more uniform approach, or the right approach?
And that is part of
because one size doesn't fit all in every CHO.
Agreed. And we want to be, so there's, standardised access and standardised assessment tools should be part of that, but should flex, as because we're not dealing with, everything being the same. I mean, that's exactly what you've described yourself. So there is a commitment to that in the rollout to it, and the standardised and the oversight of it. So
what's
that's
the oversight?
all part
What's
of
the
it.
monitoring of how it's going?
Well, through, although the CHOs are responsible for the implementation and delivery, there is through my office at national level, there is an oversight through our primary care structures. And one of the things we're trying to enhance is the supports around that. Some of the information systems that we talked about earlier in relation to the CDNTs is actually going to be a good construct for that as well. But we are working to standardise, and we're working to ensure that the way in which children are streamed So how they access, how they're assessed and how they're streamed between the sort of least complex to most complex means as well that, coming back to the point we were talking about earlier, that we understand what the child's needs are, because they're the child first and then their needs come after that. So that's all part of the implementation of the National Access Policy. Yeah.
I have another two questions to go in terms of my speaking slot, so just to be...
Benny, but just on that specific point, if there is oversight of the National Access Policy, how is it going? Because I think the point that I'm trying to get at here is that this is the basic policy. If that's not working effectively, which I think we all know it's not, then what is being done to monitor that and to address it? Because standardising it isn't necessarily going to work with the different needs.
No, but understanding how it's been implemented does require some level of us understanding this sort of standardised rollout without that hamstringing people in their responses as in the way in which they engage with families. So no, it's challenging. I think I said at the outset that we're very aware that the same types of gaps in available services, available professionals across the same types of therapies like speech and language and psychology and OT present in primary care in the same way as they do for specialist services, whether it's disability or mental health.
Back to Holly, and you know, we are on a time constraint, and I have a number of members still offering, I'm trying to be as fair as possible to everybody. So Holly...
Just very briefly, thank you, Chair. I didn't get a proper answer despite the lengthy reply on the on NAP. It's the basic policy, and the question was, how are the primary care engaging with it, and how is it being tracked and monitored? So I still haven't had an answer to that. That would be helpful. I still don't know how many of the CDNTs are fully staffed now. We know that 3.5 months ago, none of them were. How many are fully staffed now? Any? And then, not to mention the questions about retention of student therapists, which obviously there's not going to be time now. But the question I had at the end was then in relation to, for the Minister, and I think the focus should really be on that. She's spoken more about solutions than the HSE have. So I want maybe an elaboration on what should be done, could be done, and then I think we need commitment from the HSE that work will be done.
Back go to the Minister.
All right, thank you, Deputy. I outlined clearly in my statement of proposals that I have put to the HSE, because they will themselves will also have their proposals as sculpting as to what the roadmap is. The reason I have put in suggestions is that I genuinely see that there is shortcomings within the way it is at the moment. The reason I cite Down syndrome as a particular way we could work with Down syndrome is they already have therapists, and if we could work with the Down syndromes to ensure that that cohort of young people can get that support, perhaps that would alleviate some of the pressures in relation to the delivery of interventions. Like at the end of the day, we have approximately 10,000 that perhaps need another assessment of need because of the court case ruling. So we have to be innovative, we have to be pragmatic and agile in our approach. And what I was doing was actually putting it all on the table as to what of these can be worked with. And that's from looking to get the critical list from an employment point of view, to the Down syndromes, putting therapists back into schools, to working with private providers. Just actually saying that we should not rule anything out and put everything in. So that's where that presentation within my speech. In relation to the audit was another question that you talked about, the PDS audit. I genuinely do believe, with what I have seen with the MIS supports that I'm getting on a monthly basis, I do think that audit tool in itself will become the audit tool, because we will be able, the HSE will be able to track and follow actually the performance, but also the variances in staff and how many files are opened and therapies are delivered on. So I'm very clear we need to have everything on the table in the short window to find a solution. Thank you.
It's just going out untimely. We certainly, Deputy, can provide you a table of current resourcing levels, current gap by CHO area in the teams.
And the solutions the Minister is proposing, are they going ahead?
Sorry, Deputy, all of the solutions the Minister has just outlined there, we're working jointly with the Minister on. All of the solutions the Minister is talking about is what we're geared towards putting in terms of the...
Is there time frames for them?
And that will be all covered in the policy, the implementation roadmap that we're working through with the Minister in the coming weeks. We've referenced a few times today. So I don't agree with this separate impression that there's a set of actions that the Department have and the Minister have, and we're separate to them. These will be worked out very closely together. It's It's policy and implementation.
Okay, thanks. We might go